Hi everyone, welcome to the case study session on moral dilemmas brought to you by Sunya IAS in its ethics course. Case studies on moral dilemmas are very frequent in the UPSC CSE mains examination in GS paper 4. So basically, moral dilemma is when you have to choose between two or more morally difficult choices. Both of them may be ethical or unethical up to varying degrees. So there is no black and white choice. There is no right and wrong as such, but all the choices that you have will have some positives and some negatives in different amounts, right? So it becomes very difficult to choose any particular choice in such a situation. And that is why in moral dilemma based case studies, you have to choose between two or more morally difficult choices, both which may be ethical or unethical, right? So UPSC case studies are anyway very complex to understand and answer. And when you have such difficult case studies based on moral dilemmas, that acts as an obstacle in the paper because you have to think a lot while answering such questions, right? So any choice that you give is not right or wrong. Basically, you need to justify why you are giving that particular choice as the action that you would take in the case study, right? So there is no right or wrong answer. Your logic, your reasoning, and your justification will substantiate why you are choosing that particular option. If your reasoning or justification is logical, it is ethical, it is honest, it is truthful, then your answer is going in the right direction. So, all choices in front of you may involve one or more ethical values which will be left unsatisfied. In such a case, whatever choice you make will leave one important ethical dimension unmet, right? So as I've already explained, some ethical values will be left unsatisfied because these moral dilemmas involve choices which are morally or ethically correct to varying degrees. So you have to choose which ethical value you want to satisfy and which ethical value you will leave out. Then it may involve personal benefits or harm for yourself, your profession, or your family. So in such case studies, usually UPSC includes personal benefits or a benefit to the family or harm to the family or something like this, which can make the case study solution very difficult for you, right? But you need not be scared of such case studies as long as your justification and reasoning is going in the right direction. You should confidently attempt these case studies. So, case study 1, you are a struggling reporter of a news channel and have been under severe pressure from your editor-in-chief to bring some sensational news to boost television rating points or TRPs. You have interviewed a famous religious leader of a minority faction on the recent Ayodhya verdict of Supreme Court. In the interview, the religious leader used a provocative statement and urged the members of the community to rebel against the court ruling. If the interview is aired, it might spark communal tensions and law and order problem in society. You are very well aware that if the interview is presented to the editor-in-chief, he will definitely air it to boost TRPs. The interview may lead to the exponential growth of your career. In such circumstances, would it be right to present the interview to editor-in-chief? A. Identify the moral dilemma faced by you. B. Analyze your role and duties as a responsible reporter. Also suggest your course of action. So, in this particular case study, you are a struggling reporter. So, the point is that you are a struggling reporter of a news channel. You are under severe pressure from editor-in-chief for your performance, you have to bring some sensational news to boost TRPs. Now, in this context, you've interviewed a famous religious leader of a minority faction. The recent Ayodhya verdict of Supreme Court is there. So now one point to note over here is that case studies in UPSC can assume that you know about the Ayodhya verdict because it was such a big verdict. It was there in the news, it was discussed in current affairs, in newspapers, in magazines. So UPSC assumes that you will be aware about such things and they need not explain it in the question what the Ayodhya verdict was, right? So in the interview, the religious leader used provocative statement and urged members of the community to rebel against the court ruling, which means that the religious leader is trying to instigate people to rebel, right? And there might be riots because of this same. So if aired, it will spark communal tensions and law and order problem in society. As you would already be aware, there were anti-Sikh riots earlier, and it is still being discussed in the newspapers and how people suffered because of that. So any kind of communal riots or tensions, whenever you read in the newspaper, you can use those points in this particular case study, right? So there will be communal tensions, there will be law and order problem. And if interview is presented to the editor-in-chief, he will air it to boost TRPs, right? Because his major concern or his prime objective is to boost TRPs. Now, this particular interview, if aired, will lead to exponential growth of your career. So here is the moral dilemma which is being faced by you. As of now, you are a struggling reporter. But if this particular interview is aired, it will lead to phenomenal growth in your career, which means that it is an opportunity for you to level up your career, right? So in these circumstances, is it right to present interview to the editor-in-chief? Should you present the interview to the editor-in-chief? On one hand, you have your personal interest involved. On the other hand, you have public safety. So the first part of the question is identify the moral dilemma faced by you. And the second part of the question is analyze your role and duties as a responsible reporter. And another subpart is suggest your course of action. Now this particular question has 250 words and 20 marks, right? So you have 4 parts in this. One is, would it be right to present the interview to editor-in-chief? Identify moral dilemmas, analyze your role and duties as a responsible reporter, and finally suggest your course of action.
Coming to the analysis summary, from what we have seen in the case study so far, you are a struggling reporter of a news channel. You are under severe pressure from your editor-in-chief to bring some sensational news. Why do you have to get sensational news? Because he wants to boost television rating points or TRPs. In this context, you interviewed a famous religious leader of a minority faction on the recent Ayodhya verdict of Supreme Court. Religious leader used a provocative statement. He urged members of the community to rebel against the court ruling. Right? If aired, it might spark communal tensions and law and order problem in the society. So we have seen a lot of interviews coming up these days in news channels, and there's a lot of heated debate on religious lines or caste lines. So these debates might spark communal tensions, and then there can be riots or there can be a law and order problem in society. So we have to be very careful in which interviews should be aired in the interest of public order and safety, right? If presented to the editor-in-chief, he will definitely air it to boost the TRPs, and this may lead to the exponential growth of your career because the TRPs can be boosted to such an extent that you can become very popular. So the questions asked are 4. Would it be right to present the interview to the editor-in-chief? Identify moral dilemma. Analyze your role and duties as a responsible reporter and suggest your course of action. There are 4 questions asked and the question is of 20 marks. So you should try to have 5 points each in each of these 4 questions. However, if you're not able to get 5 points, it's okay. You don't have to have 5 points. It's just an indicative number. If there's nothing to write, you can skip. You can maybe write 3 points or 4 points, right? So, would it be right to present the interview to editor-in-chief? This is the first subpart of the question. So, as it is already mentioned, the editor-in-chief will air this interview definitely, and that may lead to law and order situations as well as communal tensions. So, personally, my opinion is no, it won't be right to present the interview to editor-in-chief. Okay, but your opinion can be yes, it is right to present the interview to editor in chief. So the reasons for why it is not correct to present the interview to editor in chief, I have listed down 6 reasons. Some of them are: the minister has given a provocative statement that might lead to communal tensions, right? So this is our first problem, that communal tensions can occur. Then second problem is there might be a law and order problem due to call for rebellion against the Supreme Court ruling. So he has asked people to rebel against the ruling, right? So this is the second problem, that there will be a law and order situation. Third is interview being aired will lead to contempt of the Supreme Court. So this is also a possible situation, that it leads to contempt of the Supreme Court. Why? Because the leader is calling for rebellion against the Supreme Court ruling. And Supreme Court is the highest court of the country, and you cannot disrespect the Supreme Court's decisions, right? Then media ethics stand for freedom of speech and expression. As a journalist, you have to vouch for freedom of speech and expression, that you can express whatever you want to, but it cannot be at the cost of public order and morality. Even your fundamental rights of freedom of speech and expression comes with some conditions, that you have to take care of these factors, and within those limitations you can freely express whatever you want, right? So media ethics stand for freedom of speech and expression, but it cannot be at the cost of public order and morality. Then the Supreme Court might take action against us for airing the controversial interview. If something untoward happens later on, then the Supreme Court will find out, or the executive will find out the cause, and then we can be prosecuted for airing this particular interview, right? Personally, I would suffer from crisis of conscience if I presented the interview to the editor in chief and it was aired leading to untoward incidents, right? So if I air this particular interview and it leads to riots, it leads to loss of life, property, it leads to tensions in the society, so I will be very guilty that my interview that I had taken was aired and it had led to this. So somewhere I will be the cause of all these incidents, right? So that will lead to crisis of conscience for me. Now, coming to the second subpart of the question, what are the moral dilemmas that you face? So, you can identify a lot of moral dilemmas. I've listed down 5 over here. In the exam, when you have been asked a subpart question, you just have to judge that how many points should you write in a particular subpart, because there can be a lot of things coming to your mind. However, just pick 5 important parts, important points out of so many things that I have come to your mind. And if you're not able to write 5, it is fine. Write 3 and explain them in 1 or 2 lines, right? So that can also suffice. So coming to the moral dilemmas, self-preservation versus media ethics is the first moral dilemma, right? So the self-preservation instinct tells you that you should air the interview so that there is a lot of growth in your career and you don't remain a struggling reporter from now, right? But media ethics stands for responsible coverage of events, and there is a certain code of conduct that you should follow and code of ethics that you should keep in mind while reporting events. There are certain moral values and standards of behavior that journalists should adhere to, so that whenever they report certain events, it does not lead to law and order situations, right? So there is a moral dilemma between these two things, which objective you want to achieve. Then secondly, you have accountability to superior versus accountability to national interest or public interest. Now your superior has asked you to get sensational news to boost television rating points. You are accountable to him. You did this work as part of the organization, and you have a responsibility or a moral obligation to show it to him, right? What you interviewed. But that can lead to adverse consequences for the public, and that is where this conflict of interest comes in, where you are accountable to national interest or public interest as well as a responsible and aware citizen of India, right? So public safety, public law and order, morality, all these things come into play in this particular moral dilemma. Then you have profitability versus organizational ethics. Now, the organization is always, if it is a business organization, it is for profit, right? So they want to take care of their profitability as well. However, all organizations have certain organizational ethics. They have certain moral standards which they want to follow while doing business, right? So does the organization this media firm, does it have any particular organizational ethical values which are contravened if this particular interview is aired, right? So if there are no such ethical standards, then you might as well go ahead and air this interview and your profits will rise. However, if there are certain ethical standards, then it brings into light a moral dilemma. Then you have career progression versus internal conscience. So career progression is your own objective, and it can be achieved by airing this particular interview. However, if it leads to untoward incidents, or if it leads to tensions, or if it leads to communal problems within the two communities, you will suffer from crisis of conscience and guilt, right? So internal conscience will be disturbed if you go ahead with airing the interview, but career progression will be achieved. So this is another moral dilemma that you face. Now, the last one that I have mentioned here is freedom of speech and expression versus public law and order. We have already discussed this earlier. So there is freedom of speech and expression which you must adhere to, and freedom to express what you feel is a fundamental right given in the Constitution of India, but it cannot be at the cost of public law and order, because that is something which is considered to be higher than the freedom of speech and expression, because public law and order incidents might lead to loss of life and property, right? And that is more important. So these are certain moral dilemmas that I have thought about. So now, after having gone through so many case studies videos, you would have seen that all these are just keywords which we are using to express our points, to explain our opinions, right? So once you start brainstorming and attempting case studies, you will become familiar with these keywords, and then you will be using these keywords in your case study answers. And that is the objective of the entire case studies sessions, that you become familiar with the vocabulary, and when you write answers using these words, then your answers show that you have done certain amount of hard work, studying your ethics, study material or standard books, and you understand the subject, right? Analyze your role and duty as a responsible reporter. So this is the third subpart of the question, that you have to analyze your role and your duty as a responsible reporter. So now, since there are four subparts, we have written 5 points over here. So basically, here you are not dealing with yourself as an individual looking to progress your career. You are not dealing with yourself as an employee of the organization you work with. Here, you don't have to look at yourself as a subordinate of your superior. Over here, you just have to analyze your role and duty as a reporter, a responsible reporter, right? So you have to put yourself in the shoes of a responsible reporter. So the first point is media is considered to be the fourth pillar of democracy. You would have read this in various places while reading your polity section. So you know that media is considered to be the fourth pillar of democracy, right? So it is important to uphold the democratic values of freedom of speech and expression and right to information. Okay, so if media is the fourth pillar of democracy, what is its role? It is to uphold the values of freedom of speech and expression, and you can get right to information, right? However, in this particular case, as you have seen, there are certain limitations, so you mentioned those. The above mentioned right to freedom of speech and expression has some conditions attached to it. In the case of the media, if the coverage or interview might lead to communal tensions and law and order problems, it is unethical to ignore the consequences and air the interview just for the sake of freedom of speech and expression. It is unethical to do that, right? You should also take into account the consequences, because there are a lot of ignorant minds, there are illiterate people who might take the interview otherwise, and it can lead to loss of life and property. Third, as for the pressure on me by my editor-in-chief to bring some sensational news, I will submit my work to him because it is my responsibility to do that as a subordinate, but persuade him to take an informed decision on airing the interview, highlighting all the dangers beforehand. Now, he is my superior and I'm bound to submit my work to him. But as already mentioned in the case study, it is sure that he will air it. So what should I do so that he doesn't air it? I have to explain to him all the dangers beforehand. I'll show to him myself the video and enlighten him that all these comments in or the call to rebel against the Supreme Court rebellion can lead to these particular consequences, which might be adverse for the company as well as him. So I will persuade him to take an informed decision, right? Next, how will I persuade him? I will also cite organizational ethics of the media house to convince him to not air the interview or cut out the parts urging people to rebel against the Supreme Court ruling, right? So I will also make him aware that the Supreme Court might take offense and that can lead to contempt of court, right? And I will also cite organizational ethics of the media house so that he can be aware that he is contradicting all these ethical standards set by the organization, and that can lead to action against him because of violating the code of conduct. Finally, I will also report this case to the self-regulating body to take appropriate action. Now, there is a self-regulating body in uh, the media, and I can also report this particular case to them so that they can take appropriate action, right? And this is going to be the last option. First, I will try to persuade or convince my editor-in-chief to take an informed decision, right? Moving on to the last part of the question, what is going to be my course of action, right? So personally, I am not going to air the controversial interview because of the following reasons, right? This is the ethical stand that I should take so that any law and order situations and untoward incidents can be avoided. So now I have given 5 reasons. One, it is against media ethics to air controversial content which can harm public law and order. So that is the first point. Second, it might harm the unity and integrity of India. As you have seen in the preamble, it is mentioned that the unity, integrity, and sovereignty of the country is of utmost importance. And if the interview aired by us leads to communal tensions, it might harm the unity and integrity of India, which is not what we want. Third, if the airing of the interview leads to any untoward incidents, then I will not be able to forgive myself. Fourth, airing the interview will lead to a crisis of conscience and cognitive dissonance for me. If I air the interview and if nothing happens, even then there will be a crisis of conscience and cognitive dissonance for me, that I just went ahead knowing that there might be potential negative consequences or adverse scenarios, but I chose my career progression for greed of progressing further in my career. And that will lead to a crisis of conscience and cognitive dissonance for me. And finally, it may amount to contempt of the Supreme Court, and that is something that we do not want, right? Now, moving on. So, this is case study number 2. This is about the RTI Act, and here the individual faces a moral dilemma on a decision that he has taken already, right? So a public information officer has received an application under RTI Act. Having gathered the information, the PIO discovers that the information pertains to some of the decisions taken by him, which were found to be not altogether right. There were other employees also who were party to these decisions. Disclosure of the information is likely to lead to disciplinary action with possibility of punishment against him as well as some of his colleagues. Non-disclosure or part disclosure or camouflage disclosure of information will result into lesser punishment or no punishment. The PIO is otherwise an honest and conscientious person, but this particular decision on which the RTI application has been filed turned out to be wrong. He comes to you for advice. The following are some suggested options. Please evaluate the merits and demerits of each of the options. So here in this case study, there is a public information officer. He receives an application under RTI Act. So a public information officer is supposed to supply the information requested by different people under the RTI Act, right? So he is under professional obligation and moral obligation to provide objective and correct information under the RTI Act. Otherwise, he can be penalized, right? So once he has gathered the information, the PIO discovers that this information pertains to some decisions which were taken by him and they were not altogether right. So he took some decisions, they did not turn out to be right. There were other employees also who were party to these decisions, and some of his colleagues were party to these decisions, and disclosure of this information is likely to lead to disciplinary action, and there's possibility of punishment against him as well as some of his colleagues. So this information disclosure can lead to disciplinary action and he might be penalized for the same decision, right? And his colleagues also are involved. So non-disclosure, which means that you do not disclose this particular information, or part disclosure, that you partially disclose, or camouflage disclosure, that you disclose it in some other form so that the person does not understand the meaning of the information, that will result into less punishment or no punishment, right? The public information officer or PIO otherwise is honest and conscientious. He does his duties properly. This particular decision has turned out to be wrong. So he comes to you for advice on what he should do. on the next slide, there are suggested options, and you have to evaluate the merits and demerits of each of the options. So the question is asking for merits and demerits of each of the options. Coming to the options, the first option is the PIO could refer the matter to his superior officer and seek his advice and act strictly in accordance with the advice, even though he is not completely in agreement with the advice of the superior. So the first option mentions that he should refer the matter to his superior officer and act strictly in accordance with his advice, right? The second option, the PIO could proceed on leave and leave the matter to be dealt by his successor in office or request for transfer of application to another PIO. So the second option basically helps the PIO get out of this troublesome situation, and he can proceed on leave, and his this matter can be dealt by the successor in his place, or he can request for transfer of application to some other PIO, right? So here this PIO does not have to deal with this RTI request. The third option, the PIO could weigh the consequences of disclosing the information truthfully, including the effect on his career, and reply in a manner that would not place him or his career in jeopardy, but at the same time, a little compromise can be made on the contents of the information. So in the third option, the PIO is actually thinking about himself and incorporating his personal interest in the decision of disclosure of the requested information. So he weighs the consequences of disclosing the information truthfully, and the main focus is the effect on his career, and he replies in a manner that does not harm his career or himself, and modifies the contents of the information a little bit so that there can be a little compromise, right? Finally, the fourth option is the PIO could consult his other colleagues who are party to the decision and take action as per their advice. So in the fourth option, the PIO is basically doing what his other colleagues involved in the decision are telling him to do, right? So finally, also please indicate without necessarily restricting to the above options. So now here you have some scope to show your decision making abilities. You have to indicate what you would like to advise, giving proper reasons. So your advice as well as reasons. And you don't have to restrict yourself to the above four options which are already given in the question, right? Coming to the analysis summary of this case study. So from what we have understood while going through the case study, we have a public information officer who received an application under RTI Act. So basically a public information officer has duties of providing objective and truthful information in a complete manner as per the provisions of the RTI Act. So this PIO discovers that the information pertains to some of the decisions taken by him. So here comes the moral dilemma that these decisions taken by him are under the scanner, right? Then decisions were found to be not altogether right. So the decisions that he has taken were not completely correct, and other employees are party to these decisions. So this particular RTI request has a bearing on other employees as well. Then disclosure of the information is likely to lead to disciplinary action with possibility of punishment against him as well as some of his colleagues. So if he discloses the information, it can lead to disciplinary action and punishment. Non-disclosure, part disclosure or camouflage disclosure may result into lesser punishment or no punishment, right? So there is an incentive for not disclosing the information or partially disclosing it or disclosing it in a form that leads to less punishment or no punishment. PIO is otherwise an honest and conscientious person, but this particular decision has turned out to be wrong. Only this decision has been wrong, and he comes to you for advice. So now we move on to the options and we'll try to analyze their merits and demerits. So the first option is refer the matter to his superior officer and seek his advice and act strictly in accordance with the advice, even though he is not completely in agreement with the advice of the superior. So here he is giving all the decision making powers to the superior officer. He seeks his advice and then he acts in accordance with the advice, whether he agrees with it or not. So the merits over here are benefit of advice of superior officer with more experience, right? The superior officer has more experience and he might be able to come to a good decision, and other employees are also involved in the decision, so it is imperative to bring the matter to their knowledge. So when he tells the superior officer, other employees will also get to know that this is happening, right? The third merit over here is that since the PIO himself has a conflict of interest in dealing with this information, so referring the matter to the superior is likely to lead to a more objective and impartial decision in the RTI request, right? Now, demerits are that the PIO will suffer internal dissonance if the advice given is contrary to the PIO's personal ethics, right? So, whatever he feels is correct, if the advice given by his superior officer is opposite to that, then he will have internal dissonance. And secondly, there is no choice to decide what is right for oneself. So, uh, when he gives the decision making power to his superior, he is not left with any choice to decide what he feels is right in this particular situation. And finally, the advice given by his superior can affect the PIO adversely. He might get punishment or he might face some disciplinary action. Coming to the second option, the PIO could proceed on leave and leave the matter to be dealt by his successor in office or request for transfer of the application to another PIO. So here the PIO is leaving the decision making. He is proceeding on leave and the matter will be dealt by whoever is his successor in office, or he can request for transfer of the application to someone else, right, to some other PIO. So the merits here are two, since there is conflict of interest as the matter pertains to the PIO himself, so his internal biases and perceptions come into play. It will be better for him to recuse himself from the matter and request for transfer of application to other PIO, right? So here he can excuse himself from dealing with this matter and some other PIO can deal with this particular matter. Transferring the application to other PIO can help in objective decision making, impartiality and effective justice. Because this person is involved and it is his own decision, he might be biased towards defending his decision. So transferring this matter to other PIO helps in effective justice, right? Demerits: proceeding on leave shows escapist attitude in difficult situations and it might lead to guilt, internal guilt, right? Because you should know how to deal with any difficult situation, and if you proceed on leave and not face the particular situation, it shows that you are trying to escape that particular situation. Now we look at the third option. Weigh the consequences of disclosing the information truthfully, including the effect on his career, and reply in a manner that would not place him or his career in jeopardy, but at the same time, a little compromise can be made on the contents of the information. So, in this option, the PIO is actually weighing the consequences of what will happen if I disclose the information truthfully. What will be the effect on my career? So, he's basically trying to provide the requested information in a format or in a manner that does not adversely affect him or his career. So he is going to make a little compromise on the contents of the information. So now there are two merits. self-preservation, that he and his career are protected and there is not going to be any adverse consequences for him or his career. Secondly, the RTI request is processed and he has done his job, right? So the job is complete and he is taking care of his own career as well in this particular option. Demerits: it is unethical to modify facts or contents, right? Here, you are modifying certain contents or you are making a little compromise, and that is unethical because it hinders right to information, right? That is the second point in the demerits. However, it is also unethical, and being unethical, basically that can lead to internal guilt of doing something which was not right. Coming to the fourth option, he can consult his other colleagues who are party to the decision and take action as per their advice. So now there were other colleagues who were party to this decision and he can take action as per their advice as well, because this decision affects their careers and their lives as well, right? But here you are giving the power of decision making to other colleagues and you are giving up your decision making power, right? So the merits are benefit of advice of colleagues. So these colleagues, they can come up with a better option of how to deal with the situation. Secondly, other employees are also involved in the decision. So it is imperative to bring the matter to their knowledge. So now um, it is a moral obligation of the PIO, because he was involved in that particular decision and his colleagues were involved in the decision. So it becomes morally obligatory for him to let them know that there is such an RTI request which deals with the decision which went wrong and that might adversely affect their careers, right? Now, demerits: internal dissonance if the advice given is contrary to the PIO's personal ethics. So if the PIO believes otherwise and the colleagues are saying something else which does not match the PIO's personal ethics, then there might be internal dissonance. No choice to decide what is right for oneself. Again, you are giving up the decision making power. So there is no choice to decide what you feel is ethical. And other colleagues' biases and interests get involved in the decision. So they also have an instinct of self-preservation. They have their own biases, they have their own interests, and those things also get involved in this particular decision. The next part of the question deals with what would you like to advise? Give proper reasons. So there are two parts to this question: what you want to advise, and you have to give reasons as well. So I would advise the PIO to talk to his superior and colleagues involved in the decision, as it is ethical to bring the matter to their knowledge, because it is good to bring the matter to the knowledge of the superior because he is right above you in the hierarchy, and colleagues involved in the decision, because you know that this particular RTI deals to a decision that all of you took together, and it is your moral duty to let them know that such an RTI request has come up and that can adversely impact their career. However, he should take the decision which is ethical as per his moral values and not leave the same to his superior or colleagues, because he as PIO has been assigned this particular RTI request. So he should take the decision which is ethical and he should face this particular situation. Third, he should not conceal or modify any information and provide the information sought in an objective manner. Now here, he should provide the information in a complete and truthful manner, because it is his professional duty and moral obligation to do so. Generally, he has been honest and conscientious throughout his career, which means that he does his duties properly, and so he should do that even now when faced in such a difficult situation. Finally, he should declare the conflict of interest in this case as well, that this particular decision pertains to him and he is going to take the decision as PIO on the same RTI request. Finally, he should remember that he has been honest and upright throughout his career. A wrong decision does not mean that he was dishonest. It only means that he tried his best, but the decision still did not have the intended effect. So now, when anyone is in a decision making position, certain decisions go right and certain decisions go wrong because of lack of information or lack of understanding or whatever other constraints that a person might face while taking decisions, right? So when his intention was correct, he can defend his particular decision if there is an inquiry, or if it leads to disciplinary action, or if it leads to punishment. He can defend his decisions by placing the facts on record and letting people know why that particular decision was taken and why it was logical and how the decision did not work out. So if he gives his justification in a proper manner, there might be a chance that the punishment can be avoided and that there might be no disciplinary action, right? And even if after providing justification, if there is disciplinary action, then he should just think that he tried his best, but it did not work out in his favor. So now moving on to practice case study 1. Here you should attempt this practice case study and send it to the Sunya team for evaluation. The government has planned the strategic disinvestment of State Road Transport Corporation in a phased manner by allowing some private companies to ferry buses on marked routes. The outraged workers have called for a strike against the move. You are the head of the workers' union of the Transport Corporation. In a meeting with state officials, they have informed you about the circumstances of inefficiency, corruption, and deteriorating quality of service to commuters. You have also presented the workers' viewpoint and their complaints of low pay scale and non-payment of salaries from the past few months. A deadlock has occurred between the two parties where no side is willing to lose. To break the deadlock, the officials offer you a bribe and other perks to comply with the decision of privatization in a phased manner. State transport services are in a state of peril and there's a huge outcry among the common masses. So there are two options: identify the moral dilemma faced by you and analyze your role and duties. Also suggest your course of action. So you have three questions, actually four questions. The first subpart is identify the moral dilemma faced by you. And the second subpart is analyze your role and duties and suggest your course of action. So this over here, this particular case study is about privatization and the issue of bribery, which is very common when dealing with government issues or in the bureaucracy. So you should attempt this particular case study and send it to Shunya team. Practice case study number 2. You are the manager of a spare parts company A and you have to negotiate a deal with the manager of a large manufacturing company B. The deal is highly competitive and sealing the deal is critical for your company. The deal is being worked out over dinner. After dinner, the manager of manufacturing company B offered to drop you to the hotel in his car. On the way to the hotel, he happens to hit a motorcycle, injuring the motorcyclist badly. You know the manager was driving fast and thus lost control. The law enforcement officer comes to investigate the issue and you are the sole eyewitness to it. Knowing the strict laws pertaining to road accidents, you are aware that your honest account of the incident would lead to the prosecution of the manager, and as a consequence, the deal is likely to be jeopardized, which is of immense importance to your company. So here, your personal ethics and your professional ethics are in conflict with each other, and your personal interest and professional interest are completely in conflict, right? So what are the dilemmas you face? And what will be your response to the situation? Since there are only two subparts, if you are not able to generate more points, for the dilemmas you face, you should try and explain the points that you write in 1 or 2 lines. And what will be your response to the situation? In this particular subpart, you should also give your reasoning. Whenever in a case study it is asked what your response is going to be, you should try to give reasoning as well, that as to the number of points, as well as it it gives a complete answer on why you are thinking to take a particular action. Thank you so much, and I hope you liked the video in this moral dilemmas section. And all the best for your preparation. Please attempt these case studies and send it to the Sunya team so that it can be evaluated and you can get to know how you are progressing.